California didn't just lose sunshine chasers. It lost taxpayers, workers, and families who finally decided the numbers no longer add up. And the numbers are brutal. In the latest federal count, California recorded a net domestic outflow of well over 200,000 people in a single year, one of the steepest losses in the entire nation. It still gains population from births and immigration, but the people who have the flexibility to move are voting with their feet. Look at the financial picture and it's obvious why. The median home price sits far above $700,000, nearly double the national figure. Even renting has become a slow bleed in major metros. Like Los Angeles, a typical renter now spends over 30% of their income just to stay housed. Add climbing insurance premiums in wildfire-prone regions, with some homeowners now paying more for coverage than for their mortgage, and the basic cost of remaining in the state has become unrecognizable compared to just a decade ago. Walk through any major city and you can see the pressure written into the streets. Moving trucks crawling along the freeways, for rent signs lingering in neighborhoods that used to turn over in a day. Downtown towers in San Francisco standing half-occupied while tents gather beneath their shadows. An economy still massive, still full of opportunity, but a day-to-day environment that feels heavier, more strained, more unforgiving. The issues behind the exodus fall into three unavoidable categories. First is housing and cost of living. Wage growth simply hasn't kept up with the state's inflationary reality. Middle-income households, once the backbone of California's stability, are now spending nearly half their earnings on basic expenses. Utilities, taxes, insurance, and mandatory fees add layers of friction that make upward mobility feel like a shrinking staircase. Second is the decline in perceived safety and order. Crime trends vary by city, but the visibility of disorder is constant. Retail theft forcing stores to lock everyday products behind glass. Transit systems losing riders because people feel unsafe. Homelessness increasing in high-density corridors, creating an atmosphere that feels unstable even when the data is mixed. Families aren't leaving because of charts. They're leaving because the environment no longer feels solid beneath them. Third is the tax and economic burden. California has the highest income tax brackets in the country, and layers that cost onto some of the highest sales and gasoline taxes as well. Small businesses face rising operational pressures from regulation to insurance. When people compare what they pay to what they receive in public services, the equation feels unbalanced, especially when lower-cost states offer similar or better quality of life with far less financial strain. Economists who study migration put it plainly. As one UCLA housing analyst said, people move when the gap between what they pay and what they get becomes impossible to justify. California's gap is no longer a crack, it's a canyon. California isn't emptying out. But the people who can leave are leaving. And they're not running toward warmer weather, they're running toward a life that feels possible again. And on the opposite coast, New York is facing a different version of the same unraveling. To New York. New York was never just a state. It was momentum, ambition, noise, brilliance, a place where millions came to prove something, build something, or simply feel alive. For more than a century, the streets themselves felt electric, like the ground hummed beneath people's shoes. But behind the lights and the headlines, the atmosphere has changed. The crowds feel thinner, the energy uneven, the optimism harder to find. What made New York magnetic is still here, but the pull isn't as strong as it used to be. And the contradiction shows in the simplest way: people are leaving. Not because they stopped dreaming, but because the math of the dream stopped working. Over the last few years, New York has recorded one of the largest net domestic migration losses in the country. Fewer commuters, fewer young workers, fewer families willing to fight for a place that feels like it's fighting back. The numbers don't define New York, but they reveal a shift that has been building quietly. At the center of the problem is the economy, not the stock exchange version, but the day-to-day version that determines whether people can stay. New York's cost of living has grown far faster than its wage growth. Rents hit new peaks. Property taxes in the surrounding counties strain households that once felt stable. Even the most ordinary expenses carry a premium simply because they happen here. And when the essentials rise faster than paychecks, resilience turns into exhaustion. This pressure has roots that go back decades. The city poured its future into finance and high-end development, chasing global prestige rather than domestic balance. Affordable housing lagged behind demand. Transit systems aged faster than the budgets meant to maintain them. Remote work hollowed out office corridors that once fed thousands of small businesses. As the economic layers shifted, middle-income residents found themselves in a squeeze they never expected to feel in the place they loved most. A resident in Queens put it plainly, it's not that New York changed overnight. It's that every year cost a little more and every year gave a little less. That sentiment is spreading. People aren't fleeing chaos, they're leaving because the reward no longer justifies the daily struggle. And for a city built on momentum, that's the deepest cut of all. There are efforts to turn the tide. Some neighborhoods are seeing stronger policing and better sanitation. Developers are beginning to convert unused office space into housing. Transit agencies are experimenting with new funding models to stabilize service. The will to rebuild is still here. New York has never lacked resilience. But the improvement is slow, uneven, and easily drowned out by the weight of what residents feel every day. New York is still spectacular, still iconic, still the place people around the world imagine when they picture possibility. But the truth is bitter. The Big Apple is still juicy, yet its original sweetness is fading away. 3. Illinois. New York is losing people because life feels too expensive. Illinois is losing people because the decisions that were supposed to protect its future ended up weakening its present. Illinois' problems didn't erupt, they accumulated. For decades, the state relied on temporary fixes instead of structural repairs. Pension obligations ballooned while reforms stalled. Property taxes rose year after year, becoming among the highest in the country. Budget shortfalls were patched with borrowing. And Chicago, once the reliable engine that could outrun any downturn, faced public safety concerns that shaped national perception, whether residents agreed with the headlines or not. These choices didn't just strain the system, they strained the confidence of the people living inside it. The consequences are visible everywhere. Businesses that once saw Illinois as a long-term base now quietly expand in neighboring states with lower costs and simpler regulations. Manufacturers who employed generations of workers increasingly choose Indiana, Wisconsin, or Tennessee for the next facility. Downtown Chicago still has its towers, its beauty, and its scale, but office floors remain dim and the daily rhythms that once defined the loop are slower, thinner, less certain. Residents feel the impact in their household budgets long before they see it in official reports. A homeowner in the suburbs can pay property taxes that rival a mortgage payment. Middle-income families find their raises erased by rising costs for utilities, insurance, groceries, and commuting. Local services, parks, schools, public safety cost more to support while delivering less stability than before. Every year feels heavier, and every solution seems to demand more from the same shrinking group of taxpayers. And the outcome is predictable. Illinois loses tens of thousands of residents to other states every single year. Not in sudden shockwaves, but in a steady stream that barely slows. The profile of those leaving is consistent working-age households, young professionals, early retirees trying to stretch their pensions families, who simply want predictability. This is the kind of outflow that hurts the state twice. It reduces revenue today and undermines economic momentum tomorrow. Businesses explain their departures in practical terms. They want lower operating costs, fewer bureaucratic hurdles, and environments where public safety doesn't reduce customer traffic. Economists describe the state as caught in a loop. Financial pressure weakens services, weaker services reduce confidence. Shrinking confidence pushes more residents and companies out. It isn't collapse, it's erosion. And erosion eats quietly but relentlessly. To be fair, Illinois is not pretending nothing is wrong. There are budget stabilization efforts, pilot programs to reduce violence, and discussions around pension restructuring. Some neighborhoods are improving, some companies still invest, but these advances are slow, local, and often overshadowed by the weight of what remains unresolved. What Illinois needs now is not another cycle of short-term fixes. It needs consistent fiscal discipline, a serious plan for pensions, instead of postponement, a predictable cost environment to retain employers, and a public safety strategy that restores trust without political drama. These aren't radical ideas, they're basic stability. Stability is what makes people stay. Illinois can still rebuild its foundation. But until it does, the outflow will continue. And just to the east, New Jersey shows what happens when high income collides with even higher cost of living. For New Jersey, for this story only, I'll tell it from one resident's perspective. His name is Mark. Mark has lived in New Jersey his entire life. He grew up on quiet suburban streets where neighbors actually knew each other. He went to the public schools that once ranked among the nation's best. He spent his 20s commuting into New York City, proud that he lived close enough to touch the world's biggest opportunities, but rooted enough to come home to a calmer life. Everything about New Jersey felt worth the cost. The location, the stability, the balance. He believed this state was the kind of place you invest in because it eventually pays you back. But over the last few years, that balance shifted. His paycheck rose, but his life didn't. His property taxes crept upward every year until they looked like a second mortgage. Childcare climbed, groceries climbed, insurance climbed. The cost of commuting into Manhattan swallowed more of his budget. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, friends and co-workers left. Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida. He stayed behind because loyalty mattered, because memory mattered, until one day the pressure finally made him look closer. And what he found took the sentimentality out of the equation. New Jersey doesn't have the biggest crime problem. It doesn't lack jobs. It isn't failing the way some states fail. Its problem is structural, the cost of simply existing. When Mark dug into the numbers, he saw the truth he had been avoiding. New Jersey has the highest property taxes in the entire United States, with many counties paying over $10,000 a year just to keep their homes. Housing prices remain among the highest nationwide. Everyday expenses, utilities, insurance, food, gas sit far above national averages. And despite high wages, the state still loses tens of thousands of residents every year to cheaper states. It wasn't dysfunction that pushed people out, it was arithmetic. So Mark adjusted. He trimmed every non-essential expense from his budget. He rearranged his work schedule to avoid peak commuting costs. He quietly started browsing homes across the Delaware River, the kind of search he never thought he would entertain. He didn't want to leave, but he also didn't want to spend the next 20 years fighting a system that seemed designed to drain him faster than he could refill. New Jersey isn't blind to the pressure. Some towns are experimenting with shared services to ease tax burdens. There are ongoing discussions about reforming school funding, so property taxes don't carry such a crushing share. The state is offering incentives to keep employers from drifting south. Infrastructure improvements are being pushed to make commuting less punishing. These efforts exist, but they move slowly, and the cost structure moves faster. Mark still loves New Jersey. He loves the familiarity of it, the seasons, the tight-knit blocks, the life he built with his own hands. But he doesn't know how long that love can outrun the fatigue. Every year asks more of him. Every year gives a little less in return. And as he stands at the edge of another tax bill, another rate increase, another reminder of the widening gap between loyalty and affordability, he realizes something quietly devastating. His story is not the only one. Millions of Americans are carrying the same weight, wondering how long they can keep loving a place that keeps asking them to endure more than they can give. 5. Massachusetts. Massachusetts has the kind of economy most states would trade decades to build. It is home to some of the smartest workers, strongest universities, and most advanced industries in the country. But the same forces that made Massachusetts powerful are now pushing many of its own residents toward the door. Economists don't describe this as decline. They describe it as imbalance, the moment when the economic engine moves faster than the people who are supposed to live inside it. The figures reveal the shift with uncomfortable clarity. Massachusetts has posted steady net domestic migration losses in recent years. Not a dramatic plunge, but a firm, recurring leak. Median home prices in Greater Boston sit among the highest in the nation. Rents rise faster than wages in most major cities. Healthcare, childcare, transportation, and utilities all weigh heavier than the national average. The economy continues to expand. The cost of existing inside that economy expands faster. Under an economist's view, this isn't mysterious. Massachusetts became an innovation hub, a place where biotech research, medicine, and technology built an ecosystem that pays extremely well at the top. But when that many high-income jobs cluster in one region, they lift the price floor for everyone else. Teachers, nurses, public workers, tradespeople, early career professionals, they watch their expenses grow, even when their incomes rise. Housing supply never caught up. Zoning barely moved, and the market absorbed more people than it could sustainably hold. What began as prosperity quietly turned into pressure. This pressure doesn't explode. It accumulates. Families who once imagined staying start questioning what stability really means. Younger workers build their resumes in Boston and then leave for states where their paychecks carry weight. Couples reaching midlife look at housing prices in New Hampshire, Maine, and North Carolina and realize the difference isn't lifestyle, it's breathing room. Massachusetts doesn't lose people in panic. It loses them through quiet calculation. From an economic perspective, the mechanism is simple. When high-wage sectors dominate the identity of a region, price growth becomes anchored to the spending power of those industries. That means prices remain high even when population softens. Economists call this a high-cost equilibrium, a point where the marketplace doesn't cool enough to reset, because the upper tier continues to support elevated demand. Massachusetts sits firmly in this pattern. The consequences will stretch into the next decade. Middle-income households, the ones that stabilize schools, neighborhoods, and local economies, will continue thinning. The state will retain its elite workforce. It will remain a global center for medicine and research. It will attract students, innovators, and specialists from around the world. But the people who make the day-to-day life of Massachusetts possible, the ones who teach, repair, deliver, build, treat, run, and support, will increasingly choose regions where their salaries translate into real futures. Economists are not predicting collapse. They're predicting polarization, a state that grows richer on paper while becoming harder for ordinary residents to inhabit. A place where opportunity stays bright, but the cost of touching that opportunity rises beyond reach for many. Massachusetts will remain extraordinary, but the gap between excellence and livability is widening, and more people are stepping away before that gap becomes too wide to cross. 6. Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania doesn't lose people because something catastrophic happened. It loses them because nothing moves fast enough. Economists say the state isn't collapsing, it's drifting. Drift can be just as unforgiving as decline. The evidence shows up before anyone tells the story. Pennsylvania has recorded steady net domestic outflow with the sharpest losses among young adults and working-age families. Population gains come mainly from births and international arrivals, not from Americans choosing to move in. Wage growth lags behind the national average in manufacturing, logistics, and service industries. Philadelphia and Pittsburgh expand but slower than comparable metros in the South and Mountain West. The numbers don't scream crisis, they whisper stagnation. The scenery reflects the same pattern. Old mill towns where factories once defined life now carry half-occupied storefronts and slow Saturday mornings. Blocks in Philadelphia where new professionals arrive but longtime residents quietly pack up each year. Pittsburgh's tech corridor glows with new offices yet drive 20 minutes outward, and you see neighborhoods where opportunity hasn't landed in a decade. Suburbs, once filled with young families, now age faster than they can draw new workers. A state held together but not pulled forward. Economists break the pressure into a few slow-moving forces. The first is an economy that changed but not evenly. Manufacturing declined and many regions never developed a replacement. Parts of Pittsburgh turned toward robotics, and biotech parts of Philadelphia expanded healthcare and education, but these engines operate in concentrated pockets. Large regions of central and western Pennsylvania sit between eras too far from their industrial past, not far enough into a new economic identity. The second force is wage stagnation layered against rising costs. Housing is cheaper than coastal states, but taxes, insurance, healthcare, transportation, and utilities climb year after year. The problem isn't that life is unaffordable, it's that it's becoming less competitive. When a family can earn the same amount in North Carolina or Tennessee, but keep more of it each month, the decision becomes obvious. A third force is demographic. Pennsylvania is aging. Young adults leave for places with faster-growing job markets and more energetic economic ecosystems. Older residents stay, which slows labor force renewal. Many rural counties watch school enrollments shrink. Workforce participation erodes. Healthcare demand rises. The state doesn't lose its population, it loses its momentum. A final pressure comes from regional divide. Philadelphia and Pittsburgh attract certain kinds of investment, but they also lose middle-income residents squeezed by slow wage growth and rising urban costs. Central Pennsylvania sees fewer young workers each year. Rural communities face thinning populations, limited broadband, and low job density. The map looks full, but the energy is uneven. The impact compounds quietly. Fewer working-age residents means slower acceleration. A shrinking middle class reduces spending and local business turnover. Housing remains moderately affordable, but demand softens, not strengthens. The tax base grows older, not deeper. The economy keeps moving just at a pace that fails to hold its people. Economists looking ahead describe a future of polarization, not crisis. The state will remain stable but slow. Major metros will grow but not fast enough to reverse the outflow. Rural counties will thin further. The middle will keep drifting toward states with clearer upward paths. Pennsylvania isn't breaking, it's slipping. And more residents are choosing to leave before the ground settles beneath them. 7. Ohio. Ohio isn't losing residents because it's broken. It's losing them because too many other states are rising while Ohio moves at a slower pace. Economists describe it as a long transition that never quite reaches the finish line. The numbers show the pattern clearly. Ohio posts steady net domestic outflow each year with the biggest losses among working-age adults. Cities like Cleveland, Akron, Youngstown, and Dayton continue long-term population declines. Workforce participation lingers below the national average. Median household income trails the U.S. median. Urban job growth sits behind the surging metros of the South and Southwest. Manufacturing employment is a shadow of what it once was. Nothing collapses, everything slows. The economic scenery reflects the same rhythm. Some downtowns have new apartment buildings and renovated blocks, yet one street over the foot traffic thins out and vacancies linger. Industrial towns that once powered the Midwest stand half silent, their factories automated, relocated, or permanently shuttered. Columbus grows steadily, drawing talent and investment, but much of northern and eastern Ohio remains locked in old economic cycles. Suburbs keep their affordability, but the demand from new movers no longer arrives in the waves it once did. Under an economist's lens, Ohio's struggle begins with the length of its post-industrial transition. Manufacturing didn't disappear overnight, it eroded slowly across decades. Automation reduced labor needs, global competition thinned margins, production shifted to lower-cost states and overseas. Ohio did add new sectors: logistics, healthcare, finance, parts of tech, but not at a scale large enough to replace the millions of stable jobs that defined the state's identity. A process that should have taken 10 years stretched into 30. Wage growth adds another layer of pressure. Ohio wages rise but slower than the national curve. Income gains are eaten by inflation, insurance, utilities, transportation, and property taxes. Life in Ohio remains affordable, but affordability alone doesn't create momentum. When a young professional compares a career in Columbus or Cleveland to one in Dallas, Nashville, Tampa, Raleigh, or Charlotte, the difference isn't culture, it's acceleration. Urban recovery is also uneven. Cleveland and Youngstown continue to shrink. Akron and Dayton stabilize but rarely surge. Columbus, meanwhile, becomes the outlier, attracting jobs and graduates at a pace that increasingly separates it from the rest of the state. Revitalizations exist, but they stand like islands inside larger, low-growth ecosystems, unable to exert statewide pull. Demographics deepen the divide. Ohio's population is aging, and younger workers leave for states with faster-growing economies. Colleges attract students from across the country, but many leave immediately after graduating. The remaining population skews older, slowing labor force renewal and raising dependency ratios. The state retains stability but loses velocity. The impact compounds gradually. Businesses hesitate to expand where workforce growth is thin. Housing remains affordable, but in many cities, affordability is paired with low demand. Small towns face shrinking tax bases and stagnant commercial corridors. Economic wins feel real but isolated. Jobs are created but not clustered strongly enough to shift the state's trajectory. Economists examining Ohio's future see a landscape of slow, uneven development. Columbus will continue rising. Cincinnati will hold steady. Northern and eastern regions will thin. Manufacturing will stabilize at a smaller footprint. Young professionals will keep drifting to faster-growing states. The overall population will age while growth remains modest. Ohio isn't falling behind because it lacks potential. It's falling behind because the rest of the country is moving faster than it can rebuild. 8 in Michigan. Michigan looks stable from a distance. The headlines even suggest a rebound, a slight rise in population, an economy shifting into new industries, cities attempting renewal. But economists warn that the growth Michigan shows on paper hides a deeper truth underneath. The state is drifting, not rising. And drift has a way of eroding a place quietly long before anyone admits what's happening. The numbers reveal the contradiction. Michigan did see a small population increase between 2023 and 2024, but that gain came almost entirely from international migration. At the same time, the state posted a net domestic outflow of more than 7,600 people, meaning far more residents left for other states than arrived from within the country. Michigan has also recorded natural population decline for several years, with deaths outnumbering births annually since 2020. Rural counties gained a few newcomers between 2020 and 2023, but those gains were too small to replace decades of loss. The surface appearance of growth masks the ground-level reality. Many parts of Michigan remain economically fragile, especially outside the major metros. Detroit still carries the long shadow of deindustrialization blocks, where jobs never returned, neighborhoods where population collapsed. Smaller industrial cities such as Saginaw or Flint show brief improvements but still wrestle with hollowed-out job markets. Rural counties have fewer young people than a decade ago. Even with new arrivals from abroad, the age structure keeps tilting older. Under an economist's view, the root cause is decades in the making. Michigan was built on an industrial foundation so massive that when it cracked, the entire state never fully recovered. Auto manufacturing shrank. Heavy industry declined. Automation cut demand for labor. Production moved southwest or overseas. The new economy, healthcare, logistics, tech, and professional services grew, but only in specific metro pockets. The transition that should have taken a decade expanded into a 40-year struggle, and large sections of the state remain stuck in the aftermath. Domestic outflow deepens the imbalance. Working-age adults continue leaving for states with stronger job growth, higher wage trajectories, and more predictable futures. Young adults who come for college often leave once they graduate. Families move to states with clearer opportunity ladders. And because Michigan has recorded more deaths than births in recent years, every departure hits harder. This creates a structural divide that widens with time. Metro regions with education, healthcare, or tech investment hold steady or grow slightly, but smaller towns far from those hubs continue to thin out. Housing remains affordable, yet demand stays weak in many regions. Commercial corridors lose momentum. Public services strain under older populations and limited tax growth. Prosperity clusters in a few areas while stagnation spreads in many others. The long-term consequences form slowly but firmly. A shrinking and aging workforce limits the state's economic ceiling. Local governments face tighter budgets as domestic outflow thins their tax bases. Businesses hesitate to expand where the talent pool shrinks. The state doesn't collapse, it becomes brittle, a place where stability exists but feels fragile. Economists looking toward the next decade see a Michigan shaped by uneven growth. Population increases will depend on international arrivals rather than domestic retention. Metro hubs will remain stable, but many small and mid-sized towns will keep losing people. The workforce will age faster than it renews. Opportunity gaps between regions will widen. Michigan isn't failing spectacularly. It's fading quietly. And for many residents, that slow fade may end up being the hardest truth to face. 9. Arizona. Arizona stands out on every growth chart in America. New homes rising, new residents pouring in, new jobs flashing across headlines. From a distance, it looks like a success story other states would do anything to copy. But when a state grows too fast, the first people who feel the pressure aren't the newcomers. It's the ones who already live there. The numbers tell the story. In 2023, Arizona posted a net domestic migration gain of more than 62,000 people, placing it among the top 5 states attracting new residents. Between 2020 and 2024, population swelled roughly 6%, reaching around 7.6 million. Nearly 97% of that increase came from migration, not local birth rates. Growth became the engine and newcomers became the fuel. But any engine pushed past its limits begins to shake, even if it still runs. Across the Phoenix metro, the signs spread block by block. Tower cranes swing over new luxury apartments while longtime residents struggle to keep up with rising rents. Suburbs that once offered quiet affordability are packed with traffic, overflowing classrooms, and housing that sells before it ever hits the market. Tucson shows slower but similar pressures. And outside the major metros, many smaller towns face the opposite problem. Thinning populations, weak job pipelines, and an aging workforce that doesn't attract employers the way booming cities do. Economists see the tension clearly. Arizona's rapid gains come from demand, not equilibrium. People arrive faster than homes can be built. Housing permits once surged to keep up, but are now forecast to taper as affordability squeezes builders. When migration drives almost all population growth, any slowdown exposes the cracks underneath. Wages rise, but not at the speed of housing costs, insurance, utilities, or transportation. The growth looks bright, but the strain is real. Another layer forms when you trace the origin of Arizona's population boom. Much of it comes from states where affordability collapsed years earlier. Californians, Washington residents, and even Texans arrive with higher incomes and housing expectations. Prices adjust upward to meet their buying power. Longtime Arizona residents watch the market shift around them. Suddenly, the cost of staying mirrors the cost of leaving. The economic divide widens as Phoenix grows faster than the state supporting it. Tech corridors, finance hubs, distribution centers, healthcare systems. These sectors multiply in Maricopa County. Meanwhile, rural counties lose young workers and fail to capture meaningful investment. Growth clusters at the top, leaving long stretches of the state in slow motion. It creates a picture where Arizona shines on national maps, yet feels uneven and fragile up close. Forecasts carry the same warning. Job growth remains strong but is predicted to slow. Population increases will continue, but at a gentler pace. Housing demand stays high, yet affordability erodes. If migration cools faster than housing prices, many middle-class households may find themselves squeezed out of the very state they built. Arizona remains a magnet for opportunity. Sunshine Space and booming cities still draw tens of thousands every year. But for those already rooted here, the question grows heavier. How long can a place grow before it starts pushing its own people out? Tampa, Florida. Florida looks unstoppable. Newcomers pour in from every direction, construction cranes carve new skylines, and the state continues ranking at the top of national migration charts. From afar, it resembles the American dream in motion: sunshine, low taxes, wide-open opportunities. But anyone who has lived here long enough knows the shine comes with shadows. Growth alone doesn't guarantee a life people can afford, and in Florida, that imbalance is beginning to show. The contradiction hits fast when you look at the numbers. Florida still posts enormous net in-migration, driven mostly by retirees, remote workers, and higher-income transplants escaping expensive coastal states. Yet behind that headline, longtime Floridians are quietly leaving at their highest rate in years. Insurance premiums have doubled or tripled for many households. Property insurers collapse or leave the state, entirely shrinking options and pushing rates upward. Housing costs in Miami, Tampa, Orlando, and Naples rise far faster than wages. Service sector workers, the people who keep Florida running, are being priced out of the very cities they serve. Across the state, the scenery tells the same story. In Miami, new towers rise beside older neighborhoods where renters shuffle between apartments because landlords keep raising rates. In Fort Myers and the Panhandle, homeowners tape staggering insurance bills to refrigerators, hoping next year isn't worse. In Orlando and Tampa, families face rents that swallow half their income. Inland towns struggle with worker shortages as employees flee to cheaper states like Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee. Florida remains full, vibrant, and alive, but increasingly divided between those who can absorb the rising costs and those who can't. Economists warn that Florida's success rests on foundations that strain under pressure. The population boom pushes demand for housing far beyond supply. That demand drives prices up, while construction struggles to keep pace with material shortages and zoning constraints. Insurance markets already weakened by storm losses now buckle under the combined weight of climate risk and rampant litigation. Premiums rise not because homeowners changed, but because the system cracks under repeated stress. Wages grow, but nowhere near the speed needed to match escalating costs. A deeper divide forms beneath that pressure. Florida is not one unified experience. It is two Floridas moving in opposite directions. One Florida welcomes high-income newcomers with cash offers, investment properties, and corporate relocations. The other Florida, built by teachers, nurses, service workers, and local employees, watches stability slip through its fingers. For every condo sold at record highs, another family quietly loads a U-Haul. For every coastline rebooted with luxury development, another inland neighborhood loses longtime residents to affordability flight. Climate impacts accelerate the gap. Storm cycles grow harsher. Flood zone maps expand. Rebuilding costs surge. And unlike in the past, these shifts reach wallets instantly through insurance premiums, contractor shortages, and rising taxes to cover local recovery. What once felt like an occasional hardship now feels like a recurring bill. The long-term outlook remains mixed. Florida will keep attracting newcomers. Its economy will stay strong. Tourism migration and investment will continue fueling growth. But the affordability crisis shows no sign of easing. Insurance instability threatens long-term homeownership. Wage growth trails cost curves. And as the divide deepens, more longtime Floridians will choose stability elsewhere. Florida still shines. Florida still seduces. Florida still grows. But for many who have called this place home, their entire lives, the price of staying climbs higher each year until even the sunshine feels like something they can no longer afford. Millions of Americans aren't leaving their states because they want a new adventure. They're leaving because something familiar stopped feeling like home. Taxes rose, jobs thinned, costs climbed, streets changed, stability cracked in places that once promised it. And now the quiet part is finally visible. This migration wave isn't about politics or preference, it's about survival. From California to Florida, people are voting with their feet. Some chase opportunity, others escape pressure. Many simply look for one place where life feels possible again. But one truth cuts across every map we've shown tonight. When too many ordinary families decide that staying hurts more than leaving a country, shifts beneath its own weight. America isn't breaking. America is rearranging itself. And the question each state must face is simple, not how do we grow, but how do we make people want to stay?